Hello, guys. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. We've got a lot going on tonight that we're going to talk about. As we know, the Derek Chauvin trial has wrapped up. The jury is now making their decision. We don't know if it's going to last a day or a week or even longer. It could maybe even be hours that they take, and then they come back and say, we've got it all figured out. We don't know. But now we're all waiting with bated breath. And we are waiting. Many of us are kind of hunkering down and bracing for impact. As we know, there's potentially going to be rioting in the streets. There's potentially going to be violence, protests. Let's hope there will not be violence. Let's hope there will not be riots. Let's just hope that people stick to protesting or peaceful protesting or celebrating if that's what they're if the outcome is a way that goes in a way that people like. One thing I do want to point out is that Maxine Waters is in a bit of hot water for some of the comments that she made. She recently made some comments as she was rallying people around in Minneapolis, and she was saying that she says, quote, when she's talking about the death of George Floyd, she says, if Chauvin is not found guilty, she says, quote, then we know that we've got to not only stay in the street, but we've got to fight for justice, she said. We've got to get more active. We've got to get more confrontational. You've got to make sure that they know we mean business. So a lot of people are criticizing Maxine Waters for those comments. Rightfully so. I think that it sounds like it's an incitement of violence in a way. Now, I personally can read those words and say, I don't know if that's really an incitement of violence. More so, it sounds like protest words, right? When you say we've got to fight for justice, we've got to get confrontational. Confrontational is a bit of a word that's a little bit, which way is that confrontational? Are you calling for violence? Are you just saying, get out there and show them? Like, what is that exactly? Fight for justice. Fight is a word that people use all the time in protests. But my only point in bringing this up is Maxine Waters was one of the many that called for Donald Trump to be impeached over his insurrection or incitement of an insurrection. And the words he used were like fight, normal protest words. So if Maxine Waters is going to call for the impeachment of a president over words that she herself is using, then I call hypocrite on that. And I think that the Democratic Party needs to definitely censure Maxine Waters, if not go further and potentially discuss removal. We don't need politicians making things worse, inciting things when the country's already really very much on edge over what is potentially about to happen in this Derek Chauvin case. So let's go ahead and break down the actual charges against Derek Chauvin. I haven't been able to find a very good explainer as to what the charges exactly mean and what they mean very specifically for the state of Minnesota. Every state has its own meaning in the law when they charge a person with murder in the second degree or third degree or second degree manslaughter. And so what I want to do for you guys tonight is break down very clearly what the jury is being instructed to deliberate on. So the jury has gone back and they have to discuss all of the charges against Derek Chauvin, and they have very specific instructions from the judge. Now I want to show you, this is what CNN. So CNN, when you try to find out what the charges are against Derek Chauvin, you get something similar to this every single time. And so I'm going to show you this, and then I'm going to give you guys a deeper explainer so that you can really fully understand and then even decide for yourself. You can play jury in your own mind right now and decide for yourself, would you convict based on Minnesota law? And it's a bit trickier than you would think. So according to CNN, they say right here that Chauvin has been charged, and he pled not guilty to charges of second degree unintentional murder, third degree murder, and second degree manslaughter. Okay, so what does this mean? Here's what CNN says. The second degree unintentional murder charge alleges Chauvin caused Floyd's death without intent while committing or attempting to commit felony third degree assault. In turn, third degree assault is defined as the intentional infliction of substantial bodily harm. Okay. Third-degree murder charge alleges Chauvin caused Floyd's death by perpetrating an act eminently dangerous to others and evincing a depraved mind without regard for human life. And the second-degree manslaughter charge alleges Chauvin caused Floyd's death by culpable negligence, whereby the person creates an unreasonable risk and consciously takes chances of causing death or great bodily harm. Now, the reason I want to show you what CNN's definitions are is because these are the definitions you're reading pretty much everywhere. And actually, CNN did a decent job of actually kind of giving you a little bit more of what these charges mean. Many news outlets don't tell you anything at all. They just tell you third-degree murder, second-degree manslaughter, and that's all you're really told. And then they give you some sort of blanket idea of what those things mean, which lead any reasonable person to read the quick, what does it mean, definitions, and then kind of look at the video of what happened between Derek Chauvin and George Floyd and say, yeah, convict the guy, convict him on all three charges. He should be convicted. However, what we have to do is read very specifically Minnesota's law, and very specifically what the jury is being instructed based on Minnesota law. It's not as cut and dry as many of these news outlets would make it seem. And the problem with these news outlets is when a person reads their definitions of what these charges mean, and then they see potentially that Derek Chauvin is not convicted, it creates that anger. It causes the uprising. It causes the frustration and leads us to a path that we're all sort of bracing for right now, which is impact. We're all bracing for the same summer of 2020 all over again. So many of us do not want to live in fear. Many of us do not want to see riots in our streets or small businesses burned to the ground or looting or any of these things. And so we're trying to calm things down a little bit. And I don't think these media outlets are helping. Is that a big surprise? You know, when they tell you this is the definition, and then when Derek Chauvin is found not guilty, let's say, then suddenly they're like, this is terrible. This is not justice. So let's go over the actual, a better definition of these. I'm going to show you, for one, this was an article that I found that is from KIRO. Where is KIRO? Are they in Minneapolis? Are they in? I think these might actually be in Minneapolis. KIRO. Maybe somebody can tell me where are these people at? You know how they give you all these advertisements so you can't find. Where are you? Oh gosh, they're going. Oh wait. Look. Oh, forget it. A million advertisements to find out where these people are. Where is KIRO? Anyway. Let's just move on. And so they give a better explainer. I was thinking maybe they're in Minnesota, and so maybe that's why they're giving us a slightly better explainer. So let's find out. So their explainer is, where did it go here? Okay, according to Minnesota state statutes, a person can be charged with second-degree murder. Oh, sorry, KRO is in Seattle. I knew I had recognized their name. They're in Seattle. So they give a slightly better explanation. So they say, according to Minnesota state statutes, a person can be charged with second-degree murder under two conditions. First, if the person, quote, causes the death of a human being with intent to effect the death of that person or another, but without premeditation. So that would mean heat of the moment, passionate killing. So you didn't expect that you were going to kill that person that day. So the first degree murder is premeditated. You intended to kill this person, you plotted to kill this person, and then you went and killed the person. Second degree is you didn't wake up that morning thinking, I'm going to kill a man. Okay, you got up, you did your thing, and suddenly something happened, maybe an act of road rage, for example, and in the heat of the moment, you got out of your car and you killed the person. That would be second degree murder under the condition that you are causing the death of somebody else with the intent to effect the death on that person. You're wanting to kill them, but without premeditation. Okay. So that is second degree murder, intentional murder. Now, there is unintentional second-degree murder, and that is what Derek Chauvin is being charged with. Now, second-degree unintentional murder requires that the person causes the death of the human being without intent, so they did not mean to kill them, but they were committing or attempting to commit a felony offense other than criminal sexual conduct in the first or second degree with force or violence or a drive-by shooting. So you didn't mean to kill the person, but you were doing something totally dangerous. You were committing a felony, in fact, or you were attempting to commit a felony, or you were committing a felony, and it resulted in the death of somebody else. So that would be, for example, like maybe a high-speed car chase. You know, you robbed a bank, right? You committed a felony, or you're attempting to commit a felony. You're trying to get away, and as you get in your car, you run somebody over, right? That would be unintentional second-degree murder. You did not intend to run that person over, when your car like flipped, when the police were after you and you flipped your car and it hit somebody or it killed all the passengers in your car, something like that. But you were doing something you know was wrong. It was an obvious crime and it killed people. Okay. That is unintentional second-degree murder. Or there's another one when it comes to second-degree murder, and according to Minnesota law, and that is if you cause the death while intentionally inflicting or attempting to inflict bodily harm upon the victim, when the perpetrator, that means Derek Chauvin, when the perpetrator is restrained under an order for protection. So I believe that means if there's a restraining order against you and you unintentionally caused the death of the other person, but you shouldn't have been around them anyway because there was a restraining order against you. And in this case, we know there was no restraining order against Derek Chauvin. George Floyd did not have a restraining order against Derek Chauvin. So if he's going to be convicted under second-degree unintentional murder, they have to prove that Derek Chauvin was committing an act, a felony act, that he was doing something that he knew was a crime, and that crime led to the death, even though unintentional, of another person. That sounds like that's going to be really difficult to prove under those definitions. It sounds like did Derek Chauvin kneel? Was the kneeling on his neck a crime? No, that's not considered a felony. Cops are trained and allowed to kneel on necks. That's one of their trained tactics. The question is, he did it for too long, right? Which obviously caused the death of George Floyd, or even was a contributing factor in the death of George Floyd. So I don't think the kneeling on the neck could be considered a felony when it was a part of the training. The question, the doing it too long is maybe that's where we get into the other charges. So the other charges against him, third-degree murder. So second-degree murder, by the way, gives a prison sentence up to 40 years. Charges for third-degree murder also involve intent. So according to the state statute, a person can be charged with third-degree murder by perpetrating an act eminently dangerous to others and evincing a depraved mind without regard for life and without intent to kill. So a person can be, that's the third-degree murder charge. So you are doing an act that's eminently dangerous to others. You know it's dangerous to others, and it's evincing a depraved mind without the regard for life. So you're not really intending to kill the person, but you don't care about their life at all. So you're reckless in your behavior. Maybe they could get him on that. And we're going to go a little bit deeper into these definitions here in a second, because I'm going to show you another case very similar. A person can be convicted of manslaughter in the second degree. So this is the other charge against him, 3 charges. Manslaughter in the second degree if they can prove one of 5 means under Minnesota law. So let's go in, and because that, even though Cairo did a decent job of maybe a better job than CNN of giving an explainer, they still don't give that great of a job. So we're going to turn to the source. Okay. This is a case that unfolded in the state of Minnesota using Minnesota laws. And it was an extremely similar case. And these are the exact instructions from the judge to the jury. So this is what I'm digging up for you right here. This is filed in the District Court, State of Minnesota. This is State of Minnesota versus Mohamed Noor. Do you remember this case? So Mohamed Noor was the Minnesota cop who shot and killed Justine Rushchik. If you remember this, Justine Damond Rushchik. So she was the Australian woman who ran up to the cop car and ended up getting shot. She was calling for help. She's the one, I believe, that called the police. She was trying to get some help. She ran up to the cop car, and this officer, Mohamed Noor, shot her, and she died. Okay. So these are actually right here, the jury instructions from the judge to the jury at the conclusion of the trial. So this is exactly what the jury is getting now from a different judge, but it's going to be pretty much exactly the same language. So this is what the jury is getting. This is what they're reading, and this is what they have to have. They've got the duties, that goes over this presumption of innocent. So they say they're presumed innocent unless, you can go through this. They say proof of a reason beyond a reasonable doubt. So there can't be any doubt in your mind. It has to be you're for sure. There, goes through all these things, direct and circumstantial evidence, yada, yada. Okay. So what this explainer, these directions to the jury do is they actually give a better explanation to what the charges are what they mean and what the jury has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt in order to convict under that charge. Okay, so now Mohamed Noor was actually given a slightly different charge. He was charged with 3 same charges. He had second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter. However, Mohamed Noor had second-degree murder intentional, not unintentional. Derek Chauvin's is unintentional, and Mohamed Noor's is intentional. So this one, definitions. So this, they say right here, murder in the second degree defined under the laws of Minnesota, a person intentionally causing the death of another person, but without premeditation is guilty of murder in the second degree. The elements of murder in the second degree, as alleged in this case, are, first, the death of Justine Rushik must be proved. Second, the defendant, Mohamed Noor, he caused the death of Justine Rushik. So if you look at this one, obviously, first, the death of George Floyd must be proved. Yes, we know he's died. He's not missing, and we're presuming him dead. We know he's dead. Second, the defendant, Derek Chauvin, caused the death of George Floyd. Okay. That is one thing. This is why the prosecution and defense went on that particular point for a long time, because each and every one of these charges requires, the law requires in the state of Minnesota that they prove that Derek Chauvin caused the death of George Floyd. Okay, so let's say you agree that he caused the death of George Floyd one way or another, that yes, maybe George Floyd had other things going on, but that Derek Chauvin kneeling on his neck was the impetus for those things that caused him to die, okay? That he would not have died otherwise, essentially. Second, says third, the defendant, which in this case is Derek Chauvin, acted with the intent to kill George Floyd or another person. So this one is a little different because murder in the second degree with the intent is different than unintentional. So in the unintentional case, this is where Cairo did a pretty good job, where they said under the heading of unintentional murders, a person could be charged with second-degree murder if that person causes the death without intent while committing a felony offense, okay? So other than criminal sexual conduct in the first or second degree with force or violence or a drive-by shooting. So now Mohamed Noor was found not guilty of murder in the second degree, intentional murder of the second degree. So they said that he acted with the intent to kill Justine or another person. And and it says right here that the intent to kill, you must find the defendant acted with the purpose of causing death or believed the act would have that result. Now, it's hard to believe firing your gun you wouldn't think would result in death. It seems to me that anytime you fire your weapon, you should expect somebody's going to die. So it's interesting to me that he was found not guilty on murder of second degree because obviously if you're firing your weapon, you intended to kill them. I don't think in any training anywhere with firearms are you ever trained to slow somebody down, maim them. That stuff is only in movies. I think in reality, whenever you're trained with a firearm, it's if you shoot it, you're expecting to kill. So now, with this case, they're saying without the intent to kill, but he has to be committing a felony. It's going to be very difficult for the jury to say that a cop using a strategy that is known by cops, which is kneeling on the neck. Now, we can have a discussion on whether or not that should be a strategy at all, whether or not that should be allowed, right? But it is at this juncture, and cops are trained on using this. And so I think it's going to be really difficult for the jury to say, yeah, he was committing a felony act. Officer Derek Chauvin was committing a felony act when he knelt on this guy's neck, even though there were 3 other officers standing around watching him do it, doing a training that they all had been trained to do. So that's going to be really tough. Now let's move on to murder in the third degree, depraved mind defined according to this. It says under Minnesota law, a person causing the death of another by perpetrating an act eminently dangerous to others and evincing a depraved mind without regard for human life, but without the intent to cause the death. Okay. So they say here, this is what the jury has to show. The elements of the murder in third degree as alleged in this case are, first, the death of George Floyd must be proven. We know this. Yes, he's dead. Second, the defendant, Derek Chauvin, caused the death of George Floyd. So there might be a juror, by the way, that sits there in that room deliberating that says, I don't think he caused the death of George Floyd. And if you get more than one, you've got a problem on all the charges. That's when you're going to get a hung jury. when the jury said, when you've got a member or two of the jury, or three or four or half or however many, that say we don't believe Derek Chauvin actually caused the death of George Floyd, that there were other factors. That's possible. Okay. So all of these three charges require that to be proven. But let's say you're a juror and you believe that he did cause that death. So then it says, third, the defendant, which would be Derek Chauvin's intentional act, so him kneeling on the neck of George Floyd, which he meant to do, right, which caused the death of George Floyd, was eminently dangerous to human beings and was performed without regard for human life. Such an act may not be specifically intended to cause death and may not be specifically directed at the particular person whose death occurred, but it is committed in a reckless or wanton manner with the knowledge that someone may be killed and with the heedless disregard of that happening. This is where it's going to get really tricky with murder in the third degree, because unlike the murder of Justine Rushnick, where she was she was shot. You know, when you're firing a weapon, you're expecting there to be death, right? Unlike that, in this case, he was kneeling on the neck. Kneeling on the neck is not intended to kill in any police training or any training of any kind that uses that technique. I think they use it in martial arts and other things, right? I'm not 100% certain about that, but I've heard. And so I don't think it's ever intended to kill somebody. So that's going to be a little bit of a harder thing to prove, because when they're saying an act is not specifically intended to cause death, may not be specifically directed at the particular person, but it is committed in a reckless or wanton manner with the knowledge that someone may be killed and with the heedless disregard of that happening. So when, in the case of Justine and Mohamed, he shot her. He didn't intend to kill her. But whenever you fire your weapon, you have to expect the person's going to die. On the other hand, if you kneel on a person's neck as a mechanism of restraint, which you've been trained, you're not actually expecting that person to die. And so that's where it's going to get really, really tricky, is that did Derek Chauvin know there was a possibility George Floyd could die with for you and I, it seems like, well, of course, if you're going to kneel on someone's neck for nearly 10 minutes, they're going to die, right? But I don't know. I've never gone through that training. I've never gone through any training of kneeling on someone's neck. So I'm not sure if in that training, if they tell people, you could kill somebody by doing this, or if it's one of those things where it's like, this is just a method to subdue a person. It's not likely they're going to die. It would be very rare and very unlikely. If that's what they're taught, this is going to be really tough to prove. So the judge instructions are, if you find that each one of these elements has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt, the defendant is guilty of this charge. If you find that any element has not been proven beyond a reasonable doubt, the defendant is not guilty of this charge. Again, the jury might sit there and say, I don't think there's a reasonable person with that particular training would believe that this training they received would result in the person's death. That's true. You only need one juror to say, I don't think so. Okay. Now let's talk about manslaughter in the second degree. If Derek Chauvin's going to be convicted, this would be the thing he's most likely to be convicted of. It requires the least amount of proof. Under Minnesota law, whoever, by culpable negligence, whereby he creates an unreasonable risk and consciously takes the chance of causing death or great bodily harm to another person, causes the death of another, is guilty of manslaughter in the second degree. So the jury's instructions are, first, the death of George Floyd must be proven. Second, we know George Floyd is dead. We've seen the body, right? Second, the defendant, Derek Chauvin, caused the death. Now, here's where it's interesting. Caused the death of George Floyd by culpable negligence, whereby the defendant created an unreasonable risk and consciously took a chance of causing death or great bodily harm. So this says to cause means to be a substantial causal factor in causing the death. So you don't have to be the direct reason, but you're a substantial reason. So, for example, if somebody dies by falling off a cliff, let's say, and you yourself this is a spot where, let's just say you were doing something on that spot before somebody else came along and stood on that spot. Maybe you were like taking a jackhammer to the rock. Okay, I don't know. Like you were jackhammering this rock and you were like, oh, this is whatever. And you know that this is, or even if you don't know, it caused the rock to be unstable. And then somebody comes along, and it's like in a normal park setting, and somebody comes along and they stand on that spot that you happen to be jackhammering away at earlier that day, and then the rock breaks off and they fall to their death. You are held accountable for that, even though you didn't intend on that, okay? And the cause of death was they fell to their death. It wasn't you killing them with the jackhammer, right? But it's still a causal factor in their death. It was what you did. So that's what they're saying. So you have to have that cause. So the fact that other causes contribute to the death does not relieve the defendant of criminal liability in this situation. Culpable negligence is intentional conduct that the defendant, Mohamed Noor, may not, so in this case, Derek Chauvin, may not have intended to be harmful, but that an ordinary and reasonably prudent person would recognize as involving a strong probability of injury to others. Culpable negligence is more than ordinary negligence. It is more than gross negligence. It is gross negligence coupled with an element of recklessness. So, and then it says recklessness is conscious disregard of a substantial and unjustifiable risk of death or great bodily harm to others. This means that Derek Chauvin consciously committed an act, one, that created a risk, two, the risk was substantial, three, there was no adequate reason for taking this risk, four, the defendant, George Chauvin in this case, was aware of the risk, and five, the defendant, Derek Chauvin, disregarded it. The defendant, Derek Chauvin, need not have intended, however, to cause harm. This is going to be a lot easier to prove with the jury, right? So they'll say, well, he knelt on his neck, which was part of the training. And he knelt on the neck, and he was not intending for that to cause death, part of the training. However, what wasn't necessarily part of the training was the length of time he knelt on the neck, okay? That was excessive and negligent. And in which case, doesn't matter why George Floyd ultimately died, whether he died of, something else, a heart attack or whatever it might have been. It doesn't matter if it were a stroke or any other method. It doesn't matter. This disregard that kind of triggered off these events and therefore caused this harm. Now, that is what they were trying to prove, by the way, with Brian Sicknick. Is that right? Brian Sicknick. So that was the officer at the Capitol during the insurrection, right, that they were saying was killed by the angry mob. And it turns out today they released the fact that he died by stroke and that it was of natural causes. The stroke was caused by natural causes and he died of natural causes. It just so happened to be a day after the January 6th. So what they were trying to prove was that, well, no, somebody was negligent and reckless in their behavior towards Brian Sicknick, which caused him to have the stroke. So they were thinking pepper spray, bear spray. Originally, they said the fire extinguisher was thrown at him and hit him in the head, right? So they were trying to connect the angry mob somehow to killing the officer Sicknick, but it turns out wasn't the case. He died totally of natural causes, would have maybe potentially died anyway, whether he was on duty that day or not. It's possible, though, that being on duty and having all of those events happen and that kind of heightened sensory, right, caused it. That's possible, too. But they're saying at this point, now it's been natural causes. So that, but on the other hand, with George Floyd, you could say, well, him kneeling on the neck caused this, that caused that, and that's why he died. So he doesn't have to be the direct reason for it. He just has to have done something reckless without regard that created the risk and created the death. Okay. So this is going to be a lot easier to prove. And then third, the defendant, let's see, so the act took place. Right. Okay. We know that happened. So the judge says, if you find that each of these elements has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt, the defendant, Mohamed Noor in this case, but now Derek Chauvin, is guilty. If you find that any element has not been proven beyond a reasonable doubt, the defendant, Derek Chauvin, is not guilty. Now then they go on to say, because again, Mohamed Noor was a police officer and Derek Chauvin is a police officer, so this will for sure be in the notes with the jury also, authorized use of deadly force by peace officers. The statutes of Minnesota provide that no crime is committed and a peace officer's actions are justified only when the peace officer uses deadly force in the line of duty when necessary. Now, this is going to be very, very important to the jury and to what will be the result of what the jury concludes. Says that a peace officer can use deadly force in the line of duty when necessary. to protect the peace officer or another from apparent death or great bodily harm, or to effect the arrest or capture or prevent the escape of a person whom the peace officer knows or has reasonable grounds to believe has committed or attempted to commit a felony involving the use or threatened use of deadly force, or to effect the arrest or capture or prevent the escape of a person whom the peace officer knows or has reasonable grounds to believe has committed or attempted to commit a felony if the officer reasonably believes that person will cause death or great bodily harm if the person's apprehension is delayed. So we know George Floyd was committing a felony. That's counterfeit. If you present a counterfeit bill, then you are committing a felony. Even if it's a $20 bill, or if it's, 20 million, it doesn't matter. It's considered a felony when you're trying to use counterfeit money. So he was committing a felony. Now, he wasn't committing a felony that they believed was using deadly force. A $20 fake bill is not the use of deadly force. However, what they're arguing is that his sheer size was a threat to people around him, that 3 other officers attempted to subdue him and attempted to arrest him, and he resisted the arrest of 3 other officers. So he was a very large man. He was able to overpower people. They were saying that his state of mind was one that was not right, and so therefore he's a harm to people around him because his state of mind wasn't accurate or whatever. So in that event, a peace officer is allowed to use deadly force. However, in Derek Chauvin's case, he was not attempting to use deadly force. The knee on the neck is not meant to result in death, unlike firing your weapon, your firearm. If you fire your firearm, then if you discharge your firearm, then that's potentially death, right? You're maybe going to kill somebody. So in this case, the one that I just read you, this was Mohamed Noor and Justine Damond-Rushik, right? In this particular instance, he was convicted of the charges 3rd-degree murder and 2nd-degree manslaughter. They did not convict him for 2nd-degree murder, but they did get him for 3rd-degree murder and 2nd-degree manslaughter. Now, you could use that as precedent and say, look, that was a Minnesota cop, killed a person, the precedent has been set. However, the circumstances are very different, and this is why this particular case might not pertain to the George Floyd case. First of all, Justine Damond-Rushik was not committing any crime. She was not in the act of a crime. She was not being arrested. She was not suspected of a crime. She was the woman who called the police for help. And she ran up to the police car, asking, like, oh, thank God you're here. You're here to help me. And she got shot. So the question for the cop in that situation was, what made you believe she was some sort of threat to you because she approached you? That's not a good enough reason to believe this person is a threat to you, right? When you don't know if this person's committed a crime. It's one thing if they've committed a crime, you're on pursuit and then they turn around and approach you, or it's somebody that, you've got some other circumstance that would lead you to believe this person is maybe coming after you. But somebody just approaching a police officer should not be, I go up to cops all the time, right? Maybe I should think twice about that, but I go up to cops all the time here in Venice Beach and LA and all this. And I always think that, I ask them questions or whatever, and I don't think that would trigger them to trigger at me, right? The other thing is discharging a firearm is very different than using some other sort of restraint. When you discharge your firearm, the training is you are shooting to kill. That's it. You don't ever shoot to maim or slow somebody down. That's not a real thing. So if you're discharging your firearm, then you are actually, you're going to kill somebody. So those circumstances with the Justine and Mohamed case are different and did result in Mohamed Noor getting a conviction and now serving prison time. So this hopefully has kind of broken down for you. Now you could kind of play jury in your own mind. Now knowing more about these actual charges and about Minnesota state law, what would you convict Derek Chauvin of? Reading through this, I am inclined to say he should be convicted of manslaughter in the 2nd degree. I don't think he could be charged with 2nd degree murder, because he was himself not committing a felony. He was not committing a crime that led to the death of another person. So I don't think he could be convicted of second-degree murder if I were the jury, right? Third-degree murder, maybe, right? Because that was specifically third degree, saying that that the act, even though it wasn't intentional, caused the death, was dangerous to human beings, was performed without regard to human life. That's going to be really tough to prove as well. Was he doing this not caring about this person, like choking, yes, but if I were to walk up to you and I were to choke you with the intent to make you pass out, but it killed you, I'm not trained to do that. I'm not, so there's a real possibility if I choke you, you die, right? Because I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not trained at all. And I would expect in my mind that if I did that to somebody, they would die, right? So, and I'm sure there's many other circumstances of this, scenarios that we could think of, but doing something performing an act without regard for human life, but it wasn't, even if it wasn't intended to cause the death of that person. This kind of reminds me of like DUI. Now that's a different charge under Minnesota law, but a DUI, if it weren't vehicular manslaughter, would be very similar to this, or something similar if you think of something like a DUI. So maybe you're high on drugs and whatever, and you do something reckless and it ends up killing somebody, you're held responsible under third-degree murder. So that's still going to be a little bit tricky because they're going to have to prove that he did it recklessly in a wanton manner with knowing that this could potentially cause him to die. They have to prove that that's what his state of mind was, and that's going to be very difficult to prove. I think in looking at this, the more obvious one would be manslaughter in the second degree, caused the death. We didn't mean to, but definitely caused the death. Created unreasonable risk, I think, by kneeling on his neck for way too long. I think that any other reasonable person would not have knelt on his neck for nearly as long. And so I think manslaughter in the second degree is likely the charge that they will come back with. And I also believe that that will likely lead to riots in the street. I think anything short of second degree murder and, anything short of all three charges, quite frankly, I think will result in riots in the street. So everybody hunker down, brace for impact. I mean, that's all I can think of is I hope people don't. I hope that they... I hope they don't, but that is, unfortunately, the tensions are very high. Things are very high, and people are running pretty hot. So hopefully this was a decent breakdown for you so you can kind of understand a little bit better what the charges are, so that maybe if you are one that is thinking about taking to the streets and maybe you yourself are very angry about this, really kind of look over what these meanings are and understand them, because these meanings are not just for Derek Chauvin. These meanings are for anyone who is charged with these crimes, and anybody, and maybe somebody with no money and no ability to have a good attorney, and they're charged with these crimes. And we would want that same burden of proof for that person as we'd want for anyone else. So think of that before you overreact or get too emotional, and hopefully you won't. But definitely we will now wait and see how the jury decides, and thank God you or I are not on that jury, because what a bad job to have right now. It's the worst job in the world right now. So if you have any thoughts that you'd like to add to this, you can certainly email me, kim@kimiverson.com. Also, join my locals page where you can comment and chat with me directly, or get, more interaction with me. Go to my locals page. The link is down below. And that is where you can get more of these types of thoughts, more of this type of information. And you can also watch the live stream back at any time at your leisure by going to locals and joining there. So be sure to do that.